Peter Carey slips back into Sydney with the proofs of his new novel, My Life as a Fake, in that battered envelope. It's Sunday, May the 18th, 2003, and he's going to read a chapter of the new book for Mark Roubeau. Mark is part owner of Readings Bookshops in Melbourne. The idea is for Readings, Glebe Books and some other independent booksellers to have something special to give their customers when they buy Carey's new book. It's this limited edition DVD that won't be available anywhere else. Peter's been very generous. And his new book? Well, it draws on the Ern Malley affair. This was a famous literary hoax which two Australian post-war poets pulled on Max Harris, the publisher of a literary magazine called Angry Penguins. Harris received the Malley poems in the mail, supposedly sent by Ern's loyal sister, Ethel. And ever since then, the 40s, Australians have been fascinated by the trick and by the fact that the poems, while trying to be awful, are often rather good. Peter Carey comes to his subjects in odd ways. It's been put about that he was on a beach in Jamaica reading a book on Dickens, which in turn led to reading Great Expectations, and that all of this came to him writing Jack Maggs.
That was a good explanation, I agree. Yeah.
So I asked Peter, how did he come to the Ern Malley story?
Well, I mean, the Ern Malley story is such a fabulous story, and I must admit I came to it with a whole lot of prejudices, which I think are not apparent in the book in the end, and my mind was changed about certain things as the Ern Malley story becomes something really quite different. But the one simple, single little thought that I had is that Ern Malley really, really does exist in our imagination. And when we think of Ern Malley, those of us who know about this hoax, and maybe there are fewer and fewer, we really do imagine the sister, who's like a sort of a Barry Humphries character, you know, writing the letter, you know, my brother died, I don't know whether these poems are any good, he was near. And we know her, and we can see, you know, like, we can see the privet hedge, we can sort of imagine, you know, the Gladstone bag with 2 bottles of beer inside and the bicycle being, you know, there's a whole world of sort of lower middle class suburbia that evokes. And Ern Malley, the character that Macaulay and Stewart invented, lives in our head. And I sometimes think the most brilliant bit of writing were the letters from the sister. I enclosing a 2.5 penny postage stamp for return postage, you know. That, so, although I discovered this later, sort of a confirmation of this is that in the United States, I mean, I know John Ashbery, the American poet, was, you know, aware of this work. God knows he must have been 10. I haven't really done the chronology on this, but he was, according to Michael Hayward's book, which is a fine book, aware of these poems from the beginning and liked them. John Ashbery, who I met at a party in New York, and I said, well, I've been spent the day sort of thinking about Ern Malley. And he said, I spent the day teaching Ern Malley. And so no one's teaching Macaulay and Stewart, but they're teaching Ern Malley. So there's a sort of a wonderful way in which Ern Malley has come to life. And of course, that's really like, in a way, well, in a way, a sort of a life has been created. And I started to think of Frankenstein. And Frankenstein and the monster. So this doesn't happen all at once. I mean, I've been thinking about Malley for years and years. I remember my old friend Jack Eagleton up in Bellingen had a copy of that Angry Penguins and had known Max Harris. And Max Harris had said to him, mate, I've been made about as big a fool of as anyone could ever be made a fool of, and no one's ever going to make a fool of me ever again. So you can listen to that, and you can think of what that did to Max Harris's life. There's all sorts of stuff. No? And so the minute I say these things I've said already, you can see there's a lot of different vectors of force that might push this, if you're going to deal with Frankenstein, and if you're going to deal with the notion of a creature really brought to life, you've left the soil on which Ern Malley, this whole hoax was born and which it exists, and you're entering into trying to make a work of art with its roots in these ideas. So it happens over years and years. I'll work out a neat story later, but this is the first interview.
Well, from what I remember of the Ern Malley saga, the kicker in is that the poetry inadvertently turns out to be very good.
Well, it was written by two very severely accomplished, if I can use the word severely, accomplished poets.
But they were trying not to be good, weren't they, intentionally?
Well, they couldn't help themselves. They let themselves go. I think the very first poem in the book about the Jura engraving was one I do believe, I might be incorrect, and Michael Hayward could correct me, was a poem that Macaulay had already written. And the other thing also, by the way, to remember about this, because in the course of this novel, my character's called Bob McCorkle.
He's a big bruiser of a guy.
He is. He's a monster. I mean, he's the artist monster. We all know them, if we're unlucky enough. And he, if you think that he was 24, really when he was born or when he was created, which gives him a little bit of a problem, makes him very angry because he's conceived as a joke. Obviously, this is one very angry camper. But he's only 24. And so if the early work is a little occasionally obscure or pretentious, well, for God's sake, he's 24. My poet, my Bob McCorkle, goes on to be a great poet. Not necessarily a very nice man. I mean, after all, his birth was difficult and so on. But that's the thing I think no one ever thought about at the time. He's only meant to be 24. And look at it. So, yes, to answer your question in a roundabout way, yes, much of the work's very good. Much of it is pretentious. Much of it is like a young man's work. And the poetry is also very interesting, of course, in the other way, which is that the whole subject and the point of all of these poems is that it's a hoax. It's about the hoax. So it's sort of operating in this other whole level, where in its rather occasionally malicious way, it's pointing out to its victim what it's doing, knowing that its victim won't know what it's doing.